free to take it away.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everybody being here and the opportunity to speak. If you've known me or seen me talk before, I have a hard time staying on time, and I'm going to do my best tonight. So go ahead and next slide. So we talk a lot about issues related to feral hogs, and I'm sure to all of you it's no new topic. And you've probably seen some numbers trotted around before about the damages pigs do. This is a lot of detail that I'm not going to go through right now with you. But what I would tell you is the old number of $52 million a year to Texas is a gross underestimate. The number that we have today is somewhat closer to $500 million, and it's probably higher than that because it doesn't include damages to wildlife, crops other than the big six that we have here, natural resources like our rangelands, wetlands, etc., and ecosystem services, the value that we get from those environments that benefit society at large, but also us as property owners. And the thing that I want to remind you when we talk about pig management is there's no reasonable economic incentive to keep pigs around. We did a study some years back, and the scope and scale of the pig hunting industry, that the numbers just related to pigs, somewhere in the ballpark around $300,000 a year. And most people that guide pig hunts personally experience more damage from pigs than they do make money. So this is just a little bit of a preamble to say pigs are bad and they cost us money. They cost us a lot more money than we realize, and a lot of it is in intangible ways. Go ahead, next slide. So as we all know, the ways that we can control pigs nowadays, for the most part, are pretty limited. They've been the same for a long time. We have aerial shooting, which can be a great tool, ground-based trapping, which can be great, ground shooting, including if you use thermal or night vision, snares, and dogs. But the question we have from everybody is, what about chemical control? What can I do in terms of using a toxicant? And I want to give you a little bit of an update on where we are on that. So new slide. So I want to emphasize that as of today, right now, as we are talking, there is no toxicant with a Texas registration for use, meaning the Texas Department of Ag has issued a registration for folks. That being said, I am going to talk about a product that may be coming in the near future, but we don't have any timelines right now. Let's go ahead, next slide. So there is a toxicant which you may have heard about in 2017 called Kaput Feral Hog Bait. This is a warfarin-based toxicant, which is an anticoagulant. You probably know it from old rat poisons, rodenticides. This is a low-dose warfarin bait, so it's about a 10th amount of the warfarin in it per pound that you would get in your commercial rat poisons. So there was some legislative interest in this back in 2017, and since then, in 2021, the 87th legislature asked Texas A&M AgriLife Extensions, my group, to do a field study on the product to see if we could get it to be effective in managing pigs. And since we're so limited on time, I will tell you, yes, we were able to get that. This slide says final results by August. Forgive me, I recycled a slide. We turned in our results to the legislature and the Department of Ag at the end of August this year. And essentially what we told them is across the state, in every ecoregion of the state, every season of the year, we were able to get the toxicant to kill pigs effectively. We didn't run into any non-target issues when everything worked as intended. We had a couple of basic problems. One of those was the feeder is a mechanical device and it's subject to use and abuse by pigs. So it's important to make sure you're maintaining it and that it's not getting stuck open and letting other stuff get access to the bait. And the other thing that's important is you have to be very diligent in training the pigs to use this, keeping the bait in the feeder, so keeping the feeder filled up, and really just being a diligent applicator. So yes, it can work, but I want to emphasize that no toxicant is a silver bullet when it comes to managing pigs, but it is a new tool in our toolkit. So right now, having shown that the toxicant can be effective, these results are with the legislature and the Department of Ag, and the Department of Agriculture will decide to issue a label, if at all, and how to move forward with what that label might look like. If it'll be a limited use pesticide, what restrictions it might have for folks to put it out. But the long story short is we tried this out, we were able to get it to work, and we didn't have any non-target issues with other wildlife or livestock. Go ahead, next slide. So there's another toxicant out there that's been worked on for several years. It's a sodium nitrite-based toxicant, which is ironically a food preservative often used in pork products, hot dogs, bacon, you name it. This was researched pretty heavily in the U.S. by Texas Parks and Wildlife and the USDA APHIS Wildlife Services program. So this toxicant essentially takes the red blood cells and pulls the oxygen off of them. So you essentially die of oxygen deprivation. So the pigs get sleepy, they go to sleep. The warfarin-based toxicant is not an acute toxicant, meaning that you have to feed it for several days to pigs before they finally get enough to kill them. The sodium nitrite is an acute toxicant, meaning pigs can go eat some and they die a couple of hours later. The problems with that come into play here. There were some issues with the sodium nitrite, although it's very effective in killing pigs, and it's currently being used in Australia and New Zealand. We ran into issues of it killing birds here in the States because when pigs were eating from that feeder, they were crumbling and dropping that bait. They would walk away and go die. The pigs eating the warfarin-based bait would clean up all of those crumbles because they're going to die sometime later. And that was the main difference there. So the sodium nitrite toxicant doesn't currently have an EPA registration because there's some concerns about non-targets. So the future is a little bit in flux, even though we've been working on this for a decade. It looks like in the future, USDA might pair up with Louisiana State University for a new way to formulate that bait so that it doesn't crumble and get dropped. So these are tools that are on the horizon. The warfarin-based one, probably much closer for Texas. EPA gave it a label. We're just waiting on a Texas label. Sodium nitrite, perhaps down the road, but either one is a tool in the tool belt. It's going to be great in a lot of environments, but it is not free to use. It is not cheaper than other methods per se, and it does take time and effort. So these are toxicant options. Go ahead, next slide. And I'm going to move pretty quick to try to keep on time here. So reproductive control is, of course, a hot topic and something we'd like to know more about. Basically, there is one product out there called Hog Stop, which is to reduce fertility in boars. It's exempt from EPA registration because it's a naturally occurring item and a feed additive. So the active ingredient is cottonseed oil because there's an additive or a chemical in cottonseed oil which can cut down on fertility in males. That being said, though, I'm sure it does what they say it'll do in pen trials. Out in the environment, we don't have any data on that yet to see if it would actually cut down a reproduction out in the environment, because you have to feed it to boars consistently to actually stop them. And in the meantime, your females are still reproducing. So this one's still a bit of a moving target, but there's folks working in reproductive control. Go ahead, next slide. So I just want to do a quick review to let you know some things that are moving and then talk about some specific problems on the horizon. So in 2018, the Farm Bill we had then authorized $75 million for the 5 years to do what they called a feral swine eradication and control pilot program. The operative term is pilot program in that they wanted to inject a bunch of money into a number of states to see if they could actually eradicate pigs in some areas or drive numbers down far enough for the public that damages were negligible. So these were done across a number of states, obviously Texas as well. We received $4.18 million for 6 projects, and I will tell you that those projects went very well. The return on investment from those projects was many times folded and probably more than we know. And so right now, Congress is debating the next round of this funding and thinking about making it permanent in order to push the ball down the field, so to speak, to essentially wage this war on pigs and take a lot of that pressure off private landowners. So go ahead, next slide. One thing I really want to point out, because it's exciting for us, we actually did manage to eradicate pigs up in the Panhandle in Dalham County. So this is the top northwest corner of the Panhandle, seat being in Dalhart. And they eliminated pigs from the Oklahoma Panhandle, from the Naravisa area over the border in New Mexico. And so at this stage where we're sitting right now, there are no more pigs in Dalham County after extensive work over the last several years. Will they come back? I'm sure they will at some point. But in the meantime, we've shown proof and concept that we can push the boundary back, push our front back, so to speak, in the war on pigs. So this is something exciting in the future. Go ahead, next slide. But pigs always come with new problems, and I kind of call them the gift that keeps on giving. So obviously, I'm not going to go through all the diseases that pigs bring. There's a variety of them, some that are endemic, like pseudorabies and brucellosis, E. coli, et cetera. There's some foreign animal diseases that we're concerned about, African swine fever, foot and mouth disease. There's meat-borne parasites that are a constant problem that just keep coming back. But I want to focus for the last few minutes on emerging issues. So go ahead, next slide. One thing that we're particularly concerned about in the future is vampire bat rabies. Now, depending on where you are in Texas, you may be less concerned, but vampire bats in Mexico have been pushing their boundary steadily northward for several years. The last couple of winters we had actually slowed them down, but it is a real problem and it's not going away. In Mexico and all the way south in South America, vampire bats are a source of rabies, and they're a huge problem in parts of Mexico where it is more economically feasible for livestock raisers to vaccinate their cattle for rabies every few months rather than lose what they lose to vampire bat rabies. We have actually concerns in Texas about the interaction between feral hogs and vampire bats, because as you see in this photo with a vampire bat feeding on a hog, if we get rabies started in feral hogs in the rangelands and ranchlands of South Texas, we will probably never get rid of it, or it will be very costly to eradicate it. If this happens, we'll have reinfections to cattle all the time and likely humans, and this is going to be a significant problem for us. This is a real problem for hunters, by the way, because the pigs that are more likely to get shot are going to be the ones that are rabid. And then we have an issue of hunters getting exposed to rabies when they process those pigs. So we're going to have to talk to hunters about personal protective equipment. Go ahead, next slide. Anthrax is a disease which, if you're in the hill country, will pique your interest. This has been around forever. It is native to our part of the world. It's spore-based. It's fatal to most animals, but not to pigs, ironically. They co-evolved with it. Recent research by USDA has confirmed something that we always suspected. So they took pigs that were clean, no anthrax. They took native anthrax to Texas. They took it into a research lab and infected those pigs. The pigs obviously got anthrax, but they didn't get sick from it. But they found live spores in those pigs' nasal tracts and respiratory tracts later, which means not only pigs are getting anthrax, but they are actively spreading it to new places, and they are bringing spores to places. If they go from one property to another, root in the ground, and those spores get into the ground, you have now moved anthrax from one property to another, and it never goes away. That impacts property values, that impacts livestock, wildlife. This is a very real problem for us. So if you weren't mad about pigs yet, if you're in the hill country, I hope you are now. Next slide, I've got just a couple more. If you weren't mad already, let me tell you one other thing that is new fronts and just came out this summer. So in that feral swine eradication project that I told you about, the USDA went and gunned some pigs in the Panhandle, not in Dallam County, but elsewhere, outside of the CWD zone that we knew about. They sent those pigs down to the UT Health Science Center, and they found CWD in those pigs. Not native porcine diseases like CWD, but CWD from deer, elk, you name it. They then took that CWD and they injected it into mice that were bred to express like a pig, so porcine mice, and this is how all this kind of research is done. Those pigs picked up that CWD again, and it was seen in their nervous system and their lymph nodes, but not in their brains. So there were no neurological symptoms, but it was there. So now this is one where we've got to go a little bit further to see if they can replicate the prion and if they're going to excrete it through urine, feces, saliva, just like deer do when it gets spread. But the takeaway is this is evidence that pigs can spread CWD, even if it's just in their carcasses when they die. So now you've got the potential for pigs to be moving chronic wasting disease around on the landscape, impacting property values, native wildlife, you name it. So if you weren't mad about pigs already, you weren't mad about anthrax, you weren't mad about all the economic damages, I hope you're really mad at them now. Let's go ahead, next slide. So I'm just going to go ahead and say thank you. I know we don't have time for questions, and I tried to stay right on time. I hope you're proud of me, Allison. But obviously, I'm a public servant. Your tax dollars pay me. So if you have questions later, feel free to reach out. Happy to answer anytime. I'll also plug, we have a website called feralhogs.tamu for Texas A&M University.edu. So feel free to contact us, whatever we can do. But remember, managing feral hogs is good conservation, and anybody that kills a pig in Texas is a friend of mine.
I agree with that. That was wonderful, John. Thank you so much. Dr. Tomeček leads the Texas Wild Pig Task Force, and he's also an associate professor and extension wildlife specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. There's nobody more qualified to speak on this topic. So thank you so much for joining us. Over 500 million in damages per year. That's astounding, and it really puts the problem into perspective. You covered several methods for control I wasn't very familiar with. So it's great to hear new methods to suppress populations are being developed. Thank you again for sharing your expertise and for joining us this evening.
My pleasure. Y'all have a good evening.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you to everyone who joined us for our guest kickoff, New Fronts in the Battle with Feral Hogs, presented by John Tomeček, Associate Professor and Extension Wildlife Specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. If you have any questions, as Dr. Tomeček mentioned, you can learn more by visiting feralhogs.tamu.edu.